So it's interesting to me that gets attached to a narrative which says, oh, look, we've discovered all this stuff, and the medieval Christian picture of the world is not literally true, and therefore atheism. That doesn't follow. But it's surprising how often people make the connection.
This is Why Are We Talking About Rabbits? And this is a podcast about the old world and the new, how the values in each are colliding, and how we make sense of them in First Things Foundation. www.first-things.org is what we do. Go check us out today on WAWTAR. Paul Kingsnorth, author, writer, creative extraordinaire, and a guy who is delving into the concept of the machine. He's written brilliant novels. You can find a link to all of his work. He's back with us from Ireland, Paul Kingsnorth on WAWTAR. The devil's too serious. Like, everybody's out there very serious. And I hear in your voice when you write a real beautiful lightness. It's heavy stuff, but it's light somehow. And so is there an answer in that to why I think a lot of us are upset these days about life? And I always think there's a way to laugh at this. And so this is the light part, our little studio. Can laughter save us from the machine?
That's an interesting one, isn't it? I'm glad you think there's a lightness in the writing, because a lot of people don't. They only see the doom in what I do. No. But yeah, I suppose, when you're a writer, for some reason, I have spent the last 10 years, or maybe all of my life, writing about these very big, heavy things. That's the kind of person I am. This stuff just sits on my shoulders. So I don't know why that is. I'm quite capable of being lighthearted in my actual life, but when it comes to writing, it's the really big things that I want to write about. I don't know why that is. I kind of like to be the sort of person who could write light-hearted short stories, but I'm just not, and there's no point in pretending at this point. But it's just nothing. It's not going to happen.
Don't do it.
It's not going to happen. I'm not going to be. I'm not an entertainer, really. At least not on the page. So yeah, but there are ways to write about these things. I suppose I've always tried to. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to do, but I'm always trying to speak in a kind of human dialect. I don't want to write like an academic. I don't want to write like an activist. I want to write like what I actually am, which is a kind of non-expert, lower middle class bloke, just sort of wandering through this stuff and trying to make sense of it with my head. That's all I am, and that's so. I just try and remember that. And write for people who I suppose we all just write for people who we think are probably like us, or sort of see the world a bit like us. And we're just trying to communicate to them and saying, can you see this as well? And I just have a particular style, which, I wouldn't call it lighthearted exactly, but I hope it's open. I'm not trying to be dense and prophetic with it. I don't know. I've been writing for so long, I don't even really know what my style is anymore. I just do it. But I'm glad it comes across like that.
It's in like the literary pause or something. It's in like, you can hear in your narrative, in your voice, like what you just did. Like, I think that's what I'm doing. And because you can hear that in your voice, everyone's like, yeah, you're doing it. And it's like we go along with you rather than you're hammering us with a sermon. There's like, I think he knows. I don't know. It's pretty clear he's wondering. Let's go. That's how I feel about it. And that voice to me is beautiful.
Always got to tell a story. You see, sermons are, I'm not going to say sermons are horrible, because an actual sermon can be wonderful, but I'm not a priest. I'm just a writer. And so you have to tell stories, and you have to tell stories about what people's lives might be like. You have to reach people on the human level. I say you have to. There are a lot of different ways you can write about things, but it's the best way I've found to write about the really big stuff is to try and bring it down. These essays I'm writing at the moment, they're a combination of sort of personal observations and things that have happened to me, and kind of enormous themes that I've dredged from huge books I've just read and tried to piece together to try and see a pattern. And I just found that I can't write without telling a story. I always have to write. I always have to start an essay with an image. I always have to start an essay with an image or a story that might seem human to other people, because I can't start an essay by jumping straight into some huge idea or concept or something like that. It's too dry. It's not. It's too academic. You have to tell stories. If this stuff doesn't actually make sense in people's lives, then it's irrelevant, really.
Yeah.
So that's the way you do it, isn't it? It's the way that all the best ideas are always communicated like that, through human scale stories, I think.
Right. I think that's what happened. I'm going to bring this up right now, but I think that's what happened with the Enlightenment crew that told the story of evolution. I think their story, which is an origin story, it captured Western society. It's like, oh, but I think Western society was already ready for the atheist narrative, or whatever beginning there is in the evolution story. I feel like we were primed by the 1800s to hear, wow, that story resonates with me. But I think it's coming apart right now.
So you've got evolution on your mind. You told me this. What's going on?
Well, fundamentally, I've been writing too a little bit, but mostly I've been doing these podcasts, which I often write. And the thing I did some research, and what I saw is the evolutionary theories far in advance of Darwin were talking about proof for Darwin's theories long before there was any proof. But it wasn't proof. What it was a reasoned narrative about where we came from. It goes all the way back to the Middle Ages with the Scala Natura, even back to Aristotle. And what you see is that the conversation that we came out of the muck has been going on for a long time. And Darwin takes it all and concentrates it. And what happens is, for me, is he tells a story, but it's not science. And we went for the story, and I think what we did is we gutted the heart or the nous over the last 150 years. And so I think you're writing, all of us who are in this subculture have to take on the evolution narrative. Pajot talks about it, but he kind of dismisses it. He's like, I take it or leave it. It doesn't matter to me, which I get. But there's something about it that allows, okay, let me put it this way, and I'll give it to you. Every culture needs an origin story. Ours is evolution. And with it, we live out what it tells us. And what it tells us is we are by chance. We are just something that popped up, which devalues us on some level. And then we get the machine. We have to.
Yeah. So do you believe that evolution literally didn't happen? Or do you believe that the story of evolution that's told is used in a way that backs up that narrative of meaninglessness?
Here we go.
Or don't you know? I'm putting you on the spot.
I really, obviously, I don't sit in the books and look at the bones, but I'll tell you this, as history goes, I don't believe the story that one creature became another, that there was a branch and that all the other creatures became all the other creatures. And there was morphing and there were all these links, all these, missing links. I don't believe the story that generally has been in textbooks since the 1900s, early 1900s. Do I think things change and morph and adapt? Sure. But the idea of explaining your existence, Paul, by talking about evolution as per the textbooks, I don't think it's possible. I don't believe that. But for instance, like Coca-Cola has evolved from what it was when some guy mixed it in a bottle. I think they took the cocaine out.
Sadly, yes. It would have been much more fun if they hadn't. Yeah, but life would be more interesting probably if it was still in there.
Wouldn't it though?
Well, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because I don't know about the science, but I mean, I assume that things evolve. I assume that things change. I can see that the planet is very old, and all sorts of things have been shifting along the way. But what interests me is not so much that scientific question, which I can't answer, but the way that a certain type of scientific narrative is attached to an atheist narrative. And I think that's the interesting thing, because it doesn't seem to me to be necessarily the case at all that you would have to attach a narrative about evolution or change or anything else, come to that, to a narrative about atheism. Okay, so we know that dinosaurs existed. We presume that dinosaurs existed. I hope so, because they look fun. I used to love them when I was a child. Dinosaurs are not in the Bible, so a certain type of creationist Christian is going to get very cross about that and say, therefore, the bones must be fake and make themselves look ridiculous.
Right.
We presume that's not the case. I certainly assume that's not the case. So things have obviously been changing for a long time, but it doesn't follow from that there is no creator, that there is no God, that there is nothing beyond the material world, and that everything is a meaningless mass of nothing. It doesn't. Those two things do not fit together unless you are a biblical literalist who thinks Genesis is a scientific textbook,
which I'm not.
Which are not, and most Christians have never been. And that's so. Unless you're assuming that Genesis is a scientific textbook, then there's no reason that the past has to look a particular way. And the fact that evolution may or may not have happened and dinosaurs existed and the Earth is older than people thought it was in the Middle Ages doesn't tell you anything about humans. It doesn't tell you anything about God. It doesn't tell you anything about the nature of reality, other than science has managed to discover some stuff which it didn't know before. So it's interesting to me that gets attached to a narrative which says, oh, look, we've discovered all this stuff, and the medieval Christian picture of the world is not literally true, and therefore atheism. That doesn't follow. But it's surprising how often people make the connection.
I think I hear you. You raised 30 questions, and those are my same 30, but minus one. Here's one that I think we got to wrestle with on this topic, and that is the notion of nature. So, like, is there a nature to human beings? And was that nature implanted and then revealed, or did it evolve? And so I think the tradition that I adhere to and that I was plunged into as an Orthodox Christian, it doesn't allow me to see human nature as having come out of something like animal nature. We're not the same in essence. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't something like a dying out species of dinosaurs. That really is not relevant. It's just I'm not related to the dinosaur in nature. I might be related in terms of DNA and bones, but there's something, there's an elixir that's not found in the study of DNA, which tells me who I am, that is not, quote, material. In other words, I share a lot of DNA, but it's almost not relevant in some ways because my nature is fundamentally given by God, and it's more like his nature than the nature of a rock, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's that you have to believe that to be a Christian. I mean, it seems to me anyway. I mean, you know, you have a soul, and your soul is created probably before time, depending on who you listen to. And here we are in the image of God, and here we are with a particular job to do, seems to me, as humans, whether it's to tend and keep the earth, or whether it's to achieve union with God, or whatever sort of pattern. Humans have some sort of project, it seems. Yeah, that's well said. I mean, we're created with a project. So we're not like the earthworms. We're not like the sparrows. Seems to me clearly that we ought to love and tend to them. And obviously the kind of the biological and the genetic connections between all creatures are, you know, we're all made from the same stuff. That's what it seems like to me. Everything's made from the same stuff and very closely related to everything else. But if you're going to be a Christian, you have to believe that there is a particular thing that is created that is at the heart of you. Yeah. That's pretty obvious. And so you're right. I mean, whatever sort of stance you take, I've never wrestled with this myself, really. You have to see that. That has to be the heart of the matter.
I think the modern world that's bleeding into the postmodern world is going to wrestle with a new origin story. You can feel people clamoring for a spiritual explanation to their existence. Pick a spirit, and you know, I think it's all different types, but in our tradition in Orthodox, you feel it happening all over. People are like, oh, that's really interesting. Really? Like 30 years ago, you would have thought I was a crazy person kissing a piece of wood. That's an icon.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, indeed. Plenty of people still do. So
fair
I can
point.
tell you that. Can tell you that. But no, it's true. It's very true. I think it's really interesting because this is the conclusion I've come to since becoming Christian and since writing these essays for the last few years in which I'm trying to get to the heart of what the hell's wrong with this, with the culture we're in, because there's a lot wrong with it very clearly. Western culture is in such a mess, and it just seems. I mean, I was very influenced in my early essays by reading René Guénon and his notions of an inversion that happens when a culture turns away from God, and his books. I can't remember even the titles of the blimmin' things, but The Reign of Quantity and then the Crisis of the Modern World. These two quite short books that he wrote 100 years ago. They're very, very sharp in zooming in on what was already going on, and his prophecies about what would happen were quite correct. Right. And effectively, he says, look, if you have a culture that turns away from God, every culture is built around a spiritual story. Ours was Christian. If you turn away from that, everything is coming down. And not only is everything coming down, but all of your values and the way you see the world is going to be inverted. So you end up with this inversion in which you're basically walking towards the devil rather than God, but also all of your values are inverted. So the things you used to think were virtues, you now think are sins, and the things you used to think were sins are now virtues. And that just leads to this spiritual crisis. I think that's where we are. And I think that is reflected in the culture war, and it's reflected in the general mess of society. And we're confused, and we think that we're in an economic crisis or a political one or an ecological one. Those are real things. But the heart of it is a spiritual crisis. We've just decided that there is no God and we can sort it all out ourselves. And as a result, we're going to go mad. I think Guénon said this and Spengler said it as well. Spengler was another writer I was quite taken by a couple of years ago. Spengler said there would be a second religiousness, as he called it, in the 21st century, as people went looking for God again. And Guénon said the same thing. He said, look, this is what he wrote 100 years ago. He said the only institution that could possibly save the West now would be the Catholic Church if it got its act together. And if that doesn't happen, something's going to come in from outside. It's quite interesting. He said something's going to come in because if the West can't rediscover its own spiritual traditions, a void will be filled by something else. Maybe it'll be Islam, maybe it'll be Buddhism, whatever it will be. Something's going to come in. Maybe people are going to come and bring it with them. Maybe the religion's going to come. But something will sweep in, which I think is what's happened after post-1960s. We're desperately searching in the East, especially. I was a Buddhist for quite a few years. People are, like you say, desperate for something to fill the void up that's been emptied. And I think that's only going to get more so. And I've seen the same thing with Orthodoxy. I mean, look at me. I'm an Orthodox Christian. If you told me that 5 years ago, I don't know what I'd have said. It's bonkers in one way, but it also makes perfect sense when we go into it. And there's a lot of people doing this now.
Yeah, almost against their will in search of meaning. I mean, that's what happened to me, basically, in starting in my ventures in Peace Corps in West Africa and then Georgia. I couldn't avoid my modern mind, incapable as it was of making sense of the old world. I kept hitting a dead end. And I kept thinking of, because I studied history, I kept thinking of, wait, that's a lie. Wait a minute, that's a lie. People are happy here. People are living on $3 a day, but they're really happy. And yeah, they put mud on that wound, but it kind of healed. And excuse me, allergies around this joint. And I kept seeing a humanity in the Dark Ages people that made me reconsider the narrative. And now I think, like you said, the Western narrative is dying. But that still leads me to this question about what do the power structures, how do they answer this question? Can't we get somebody on here, me, you, and then like Klaus Schwab, and we have an honest conversation.
I would be up for that. You can write him an email and see if
let's see what we can do.
You never know.
You actually do never know. You're kind of making noises in Europe and he's over there. There's something needs to happen. Like I've been trying to bring on these I don't know what they're called, woke Orthodox Christian people in America. Do you know this whole debate over here? Do you know how it goes?
Which particular one?
Well, it's sort of like traditional Orthodox, grounded in the fathers versus Orthodox who need to understand, who are teaching that we need to understand America as a special place that demands special, approach to things like, how we offer communion during the pandemic. There's this fight about, really, it's about evolution. How much do we adapt to the culture that we call America? I want to bring those two sides together. I'm dying, but I got a bad last name. So people won't join me because my brother's quite well known as one of those traditional guys. And so when I try to bring on folks like from Fordham or whatever, they won't come on because they think I'm trying to trap them. And I just want to have a conversation, man. It must happen to you over in Europe. People bring you on to battle you, or what do they do? Like the secular sort of elites with you?
I don't get many secular people asking to debate me at the moment. I don't know why that is. Probably because I'm a Christian. I mean, I don't know. All I'm really interested in doing at the moment is doing my writing and talking about, especially talking about the machine, but also talking about Christianity and what that means and where it's going. So I always find debates and arguments quite futile. I mean, right. I generally don't. Conversations I like, debates I don't. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone about anything. But if it's set up as a kind of as a battle where somebody has to win, it's immediately futile. So no, I don't do that really at the moment. But we'll see how it goes.
I feel like you'd be good at the conversation. Also, it feels like you have the bona fides to understand the middle way because of your past and your understanding of the previous worldview or the worldview of modernity. I think that's what's happening in your writing, brother. I do. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, I think there's this tension that runs through everything I write because I've been on a journey for a long time, and I'm coming from the point of view of just an ordinary modern sort of guy, I suppose. I'm not that modern. I'm actually quite old-fashioned, and I'm 50 now, so I'm totally out of the culture. But I've come into this very traditional faith, and it's answered a lot of my questions. And the reason I came into the traditional faith is that I wanted a faith that was very old and was guarded and was taught and was handed down and wasn't radically changed. And that's actually the great thing about Orthodoxy. It hasn't gone through the ructions of Catholicism or Protestantism. It doesn't change every 5 minutes. It doesn't adapt itself to the culture. Yet, anyway. I mean, I guess it might be different in America because you've got the usual tensions there. But Orthodoxy hasn't really had to wrestle with the modern world until the last few decades, I think.
Do you do this 1 foot in, 1 foot out as a person growing into a new faith? Can you feel yourself in whatever the modern European culture and not wanting in, or are you coming to peace with it? How do you straddle? I think people would like to know that.
Well, I mean, the thing about me is I live in a bit of a bubble, which I've created myself. So, we live out, and me and my family, we live out in the country. We have a few acres of land. We've homeschooled our children. I make a living from writing, so I don't have to go to work. We have friends and neighbors around here. And I have my church and the monastery that I go to, and the things I do online like this, and occasionally going to see people and family. And that's it, really. I'm quite a hermit in that sense. So I've been able to create a life where I don't really have to engage very much with the extreme edge of the modern world. I very rarely go to a city, for example. And when I do, it's Galway, which would count as a village in America. So in that sense, I have been able to opt out, which is what I wanted to do for years. And when I was younger, I was very much in the city life and very much in the young Western man life. But it's changed a lot. So for me, the only thing that really interests me is deepening the faith and learning about the faith and trying to be transformed by the faith and working out what that means, which is a job of a lifetime. And I've only been doing it for 2 years. So that is what, I have a strong intuition that there's something really powerful in this faith, in this church, in this way.
Do you know Rod Dreher and his work on the Benedictine option and creating community?
Actually, he came and interviewed me in Ireland a few weeks back, actually. So,
what do you think of
I've not read that book, but I know about it.
Can you do it? Do you want to enter into such a community?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. It's with those things, you'd have to find the community. And the thing about orthodoxy in the West is that there's not that many Orthodox people here.
Right.
And the ones who are here tend to be from immigrant communities anyway. So I've got a lot of Romanian friends in the church, and they're Romanian, so they all know each other. And I'm always made very welcome, but I'm not quite in that community really. So I think that kind of community is actually really appealing. But, I haven't got access to one. And also, I don't have an entirely Orthodox family. My wife is a Sikh, for example. One of my children is baptized into the church and the other one isn't. So we're quite, we've got feet in lots of different camps, which is actually quite productive and rather nice. So there's all of the modern world is here, I kind of feel, in this tiny house, in a way.
Right.
So, yeah, I actually find the notion of it's funny, I find the notion of a religious community really attractive. I find the notion of being a monk really attractive. But that's probably just a romantic fantasy there's not actually anything to do with who I am as a person. I don't think I could probably ever do it or would ever have the opportunity to. But
let's I want to ask you a question about that. I'm just gonna take a break for 1 second. Andrew, swipe it. Hey everybody, it's spring, it's baseball season. You know what else it is? It's time to recruit for the Georgian Republic. I want to quickly mention that we're recruiting for a new field worker in the Georgian Republic for this current rotation. Here's a quick look at what it means to be a field worker. Links in the description. Check it out. We're back. Here's the question. So this monk idea, I love it. When I know I need to be a better person, I think, man, that would be a good option. I get really afraid of it. Here's my question for you as a convert. And really just, this is about asceticism as an idea. Is asceticism or a lack thereof at the heart of the collapse of modern society? You can talk about monks if you want. I happen to think more monks makes a better world, but just asceticism as an activity in people, spending 3 hours writing and not an hour and a half, and the other hour and a half is on something else, Instagram. Do you think that could be something like an engine for destruction going on?
What, a lack of asceticism, you mean?
Yeah, the lack.
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting because the other interesting thing is how the Orthodox Church seems to me to be the last ascetic church, really. Asceticism in the Western churches is virtually gone. I have Catholic friends, and the difference between the Orthodox Lent and the Catholic Lent in terms of asceticism and severity is just not comparable.
Right.
Because the Orthodox do what the Catholics used to do, which is have a strict fast for 40 days, and everybody does the same thing, and we still fast twice a week, and there's a strong prayer rule, and people
don't forget the marital fast.
The marital fast. We talked about the marital fast last time. Yes,
yes
the less said about that, the better. That's inhuman, but there we are. So
sorry about that. I had to bring it up.
But this is the thing. You see, the Orthodox Church is another reason I was attracted to it. It still takes this very seriously, and there's no slacking. My priest is not having any messing about when it comes to fasting. He tells me that it's the most important thing to do, and I think he's right. And I've got a lot better at it. And it's really, really important. And as a society, one of the things that's interesting to me is for the last couple of years, I've been fasting before Easter, fasting before Christmas, and then you have your feast on Pascha, your feast on Christmas Day. And you realize that for the whole of Western history, the fast and the feast go together. This is the point, right? You fast and then you feast. We've got rid of the fast in our culture, and all we do is feast. We feast all the time. We feast every day. Consumerism requires us to feast every day. All of the 7 deadly sins are now consumer options that we should promote all the time. They're all highly profitable. So the culture is extremely anti-ascetic. And I do think that actually I have come to the conclusion that asceticism actually is the key to to any kind of holiness. It's the key to living a religious life, but it's also the key to just living a decent cultural life, because we've wrecked the planet, and we've wrecked our culture, and we've wrecked our souls with constant glutting on the fruits of the earth, and we've wrecked pretty much everything you could wreck. And we've got a ton of stuff, but we've lost everything that matters, and that's why we have a cultural crisis. And we're not going to solve that with more economic growth or whatever. And so this is the paradox of the ascetic way, is that it teaches you. It's a bit like trying to cut yourself off from your passions, right? You don't want to do that. You want to pursue all your passions. You want to pursue the things you want to do. And similarly, why should you not be able to eat nice food or have a drink or have sex or whatever? Why do you want to do that? It's just ridiculous. These are good things. But when you start to cut yourself off from them, you realize that you're controlled by them, and you realize that freedom actually comes from wanting less. And this is something that every sage in every culture across history has always told us. Right? You have to live simply so that people can simply live, and we don't do that. And so we try to pursue global justice through politics or technology or efficient robotics or artificial intelligence or all of this, and it's just the devil's trap. It's just the devil's trap. It's the apple again. It's like, hey guys, we can sort everything out with technology and politics and revolution. It's Babylon. It's actually the Tower of Babel. Actually, the solution is asceticism, and that's a Christian position, but it's also pretty obviously a cultural solution, I think, to where we are. But try selling that. Try standing for president on an ascetic platform and see how far it gets you. So you can only ever do it yourself, and that's where you come back to the community. You do it yourself. Exactly. You do it in the community. You do it in your church. It's not a societal proposition. This is what Christians have done from the first. Not only Christians, plenty of other cultures. It seems to me, and like I say, it's a kind of uncomfortable conclusion, that's what you need to do now. That's what we need to be doing, and we need to be doing it by example, because you can only do it by example. No one's going to listen to a word you say if you're not living it.
It's a great. There's a great book called Sugar, and it's really it's written by a doctor. I forget which. I think he's a heart doctor, and he saw that sugar essentially was in everything in America. It had created. I always think of it as icon, right? An image of Americans. The image was obesity. It's how you guys in Europe and all around the world know us. If you think about that, that's a fact. People roll in, they're big, and people say they must be American. And he said, we got to do something. And he wrote this book about sugar, and people loved it, and they would come to him, thank you, thank you, thank you. But what they said is I can't lose weight. So he created a farm. I forget the name of the book. I'll put it in the show notes. And on the farm, he invited these people that were adherents to his way of seeing the world, and they all lost weight. And he said it was the joy of his life. And then he sent them back to Alabama and Wisconsin, and they all got big again. And he was providing the ascetics. And if the culture doesn't provide it, I don't know many people that can outperform their culture. And that makes me sad. You can do it, but you have to surround yourself, right? It makes me sad. That's why Roger's book is interesting to me. On the other hand, what about those who go out into the world? I think of missionary types of all sorts. I think you were one for the environmental movement, where they actually eschew their culture in order to teach others. I love those kind of people. I think we're doing that with First Things, but is it even effective in the end? Is it even possible to talk to people about ideas without creating a way for them to practice them daily? I don't know.
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? All you can do as a writer is just write what you think is true and hope it goes out into the world and does something useful. I mean, I know that things that I've written in the past have been useful to people, and I also know that people have tried to live based on things I've said as well, which is slightly intimidating, I have to say. But
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not asking anyone to follow me. That would be a terrible idea. But
people are writing you, I've married a Sikh and I live on a farm.
I've decided to retire to an Orthodox community that I started myself in the middle of Ireland. Yeah.
You
gotta be careful what you wish for.
Don't do that.
But if you don't, thing is, you can't change the world. You can maybe change yourself. You can also allow yourself to be changed. But I don't think, like thing you were just saying about the culture, right? So you live surrounded by sugar, you live surrounded by fat. That's America. That's also pretty much Ireland and Europe and everywhere else now in the modern world, right? You live surrounded by Coca-Cola, and all of this stuff is designed. You live surrounded by the internet. All of this stuff is designed to press all of your buttons all day long, and unless you have the constitution of an ox, you're not going to be able to just walk through that. Of course, you're going to eat chocolate and you're going to eat crisps and you're going to go on Instagram, whatever. Of course you are, because it's designed to make you do that, and it's very hard to say no to it. So unless you have a spiritual path that teaches you ascesis, and unless you have a community around you that's kind of doing it as well, so you've got that social pressure and you've got people to talk to, it's a very hard thing to do.
Right.
So, and I think that's what you need if you're going to. There's never really been a world like this with this level of digital temptation and food temptation and cheap stuff. And, it's not, no one's ever had to deal with it before. It's like being an alcoholic and just living in a pub. It's impossible to resist it. What are you going to do? So you have to build spaces. I mean, like you mentioned the Benedict option. As I say, I haven't read it, but as far as I know, that's the principle behind that. You build spaces, you build communities. I've just written an essay on a similar topic, actually, of how you can become almost a tribal barbarian in the modern world. And
I saw that. I think it came out today. Yeah.
Similar argument, right? You have to resist. You need to evade the states. You need to evade the corporations. But it's not a question of resistance so much as evasion, and you really can't do it on your own. And I do think the more I write about this stuff and the more I go into the orthodox path, as I say, it all comes down to that asceticism. And that's a challenge.
It's one reason why I think in our world, the modern world, why we can't say, well, what difference does it make to me what they do over there, X, Y, or Z? You wrote a nice article on transgender/transhumanism, and it struck me. I'll tell you a quick story. We opened this restaurant, KP. It's a Georgian style restaurant. We serve Georgian food and do Georgian traditions in there, including something called the supra, sometimes called a KP. So we may have spoken about this, but that table is every Friday, and often this weekend, we have it also Saturday, but we invite the community. So you and your wife could come to the table. You would join 18 others, and we'd start the tradition. And the tradition is a series of toasts to eternal themes. It feels quasi-religious, but a good tamada, a good Toastmaster they're not pushing it on you. What they're doing is inviting you to toast back on the theme in the Socratic style. So I offer an idea, and then the table offers it back. So the other day, I was not the tamada. I was not the leading the toasts. But our tamada, who is a veteran, he fought both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, 2 tours. He saw lots of suffering. And his buddy was sitting right next to him, 20 people at the table, and his buddy right next to him. I'll leave names out of this, but his buddy is also a vet and also saw people die, a lot of people. And the table's filled with good people, including some folks who had come together as a nice group who were, shall we say, progressive. Their toasts were beautiful and also progressive in nature. So that's good. Here's what happened. And I want to hear your thoughts on this. The Tamada did a toast to the 5th toast to the dead, which is a very traditional toast in Georgia. It's everybody stands. It's a very solemn moment. There's some singing, and it's a toast to our ancestors, the people who came before us. Now, remember, you're meeting people. By this time, it's an hour into the dinner, and people are starting to feel comfortable with each other. Toast to the dead. And then each person's encouraged to toast also to the people they've lost. And my buddy, the Tamada, is just about to invite his buddy to toast because he wanted to. And someone else toasted from down at the other end of the table. And it was a toast to Cynthia, to the death of Cynthia. I'm making this name up because the person had gone from being a woman to being a man. They were transgender. And they were toasting to the soul that they were, the old person who had died, and remembering the new person. So their toast was to that, who they were. So my buddy and my Tamada friend and his buddy got red-faced because they were about to toast the people who lost their arms and legs and who have names. And it was a moment where the spirit was necessary in the spirit of the Georgian table. So the Tamada did not have his buddy toast out of anger and just let it go. And by the end, they were all taking pictures together. But to do this in public at a public restaurant where everyone's together, it's wild. And I think that's what brings community together. Now, a lot of my friends are going to call me a sellout or call the Tamada a sellout for not calling out the narcissism of that toast. I don't know. I'm glad he didn't. But I think there's deep narcissism in that toast to the dead self. Now, maybe not. Maybe there's poetry. What do you think about that? And that's happening, by the way, on the weekends in Greenville. If you want to come to, it's happening in the South, in the American South, which is very weird, but it's happening.
Well, it's the meeting of two worlds, isn't it? So yeah. I did write this essay about transgender and transhuman because I think that one leads to the other. I think we're going down the same path in that sense. And I'm back. Apologies, my children decided they were going to have a game based on gymnastics in the next room, which I've normally approve of. It's because they're 12 and 15. They don't play together that much, but they chose to do it when I was doing a podcast. So anyway, apologies. So
I love it though. I love it.
So yeah, I was thinking of Philip Reef when you were talking that, and Philip Reef's book, The Triumph of the Therapeutic, and I wrote an essay which included some references to that. I don't know if it was that essay about gender and transhumanism, but Philip Reef has this notion that we're living in this therapeutic culture. And he comes up with this notion that there are 4 different types of man who go through history. I can't remember who they all are now. I think they start with religious man, and then they goes to religious man, and then economic man, and then therapeutic man. And his basic notion is that we're living in the age of therapeutic humanity. And therapeutic humanity, unlike say economic humanity or religious humanity or warrior humanity,
political, I think was one of them. Yeah,
it's all the difference between our culture and all the ones that came before it is ours is internally focused. It's narcissistic, right. Like you say, right? So we get our meaning from everything that goes on inside us. So it's all Jung, it's all therapy, it's all me, it's all self-help. We don't get our meaning so much from going out and transforming the world, fighting other people, creating something, building empires, whatever it was that gave us meaning before, for better or for worse. We get our meaning by effectively through narcissism, through looking at ourselves. So
that sounds bad, Paul. That sounds bad.
It is bad. It's not great. And so if you look at, say, the gender moment in the context of that, then what we've got is a group of young people who are getting great meaning from, in their view, becoming the opposite gender or, choosing from one of 500 genders that exist. And that's never ending because it's Gnosticism. Ultimately, right. This is, as you say, what is this soul that has died and been replaced by another soul? Are we saying that a woman's soul can be in a man's body? That's a theological claim, right? So, I think this is the other thing that's happening. The triumph of the therapeutic has led to a completely new anthropology being born.
Right.
And it's very unchristian. It's not just unchristian, it's opposed to pretty much any traditional religion, which is why Christianity and tradition as a whole are coming under attack in the West. We've got this new anthropology where we can be whatever we want to be.
Right.
If I want to be a woman, I'm a woman. And if I want to be a different species, I can be that. People are doing this as well, right? And if I want to be if I want to invent my own gender, whatever that quite means, I can do that. And if you try to stop me doing that, that's hatred. And there should be laws against that. And sometimes there are laws against that. And, we have all of these situations in the United States where children are being transitioned at school without their parents being told. Terrible, terrible things happening, right? And young people having operations that they'll never be able to recover from based on what is really a Gnostic story that a young troubled teenager is troubled because they have a different soul trapped in their body.
Yeah.
And there's no, what's the actual claim? It's a theological claim, this. And this is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because I think what's one of the things I was trying to say in that essay is that I think we're seeing something presented as a civil rights struggle, which is not a civil rights struggle, right? So the story we're being told is that transgender people have been oppressed and they have to be liberated. And I'm sure it's true that transgender people have been oppressed as well. And
sure.
Right. I'm not trying to deny this, and I'm not trying to say that these feelings are not true, and I'm not trying to say that this should just all be laughed at. But actually what's happening, I think, is the birth of this new anthropology. And I think it does lead directly to transhumanism, because what we're saying is that the body is endlessly malleable, because it can be whatever we want it to be, and our soul can be whatever we want it to be, and I can be the opposite sex, and I can be a different species, and I can do this, that, and the other. And that's the same line of thinking that says I can put a chip in my brain, or I can upload my consciousness. And there are transgender activists who have openly said this as well. Martin Rothblatt most famously said that transgenderism is the on-ramp to transhumanism.
Right.
So I think this is the same spectrum. And as I say, I don't mean to demean anyone who's struggling with this stuff, but we have to, you have to say what it is. You have to say what you see. And it's not compatible, is it, with the Christian view that says your soul is created and here it is, and you have a body, and that's who you are, and somehow you have to survive that.
Without being,
so that's the clash.
Without being overly combative, when I read that article, I thought about, you're describing a propositional narcissism, like in the proposition is the truth. But I thought backwards. I thought backwards to really the evangelical movements of the early 1800s, where I've taken Jesus into my heart and now I'm saved. That's all proposition. I've done that. And I'm not saying they're the same. And I'm not saying a Christian who says that is heretical, though they may be. I'm saying there is something similar in I'm a woman because I have therefore proclaimed. And it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. If I think they're part and parcel, they're cousins in modernity. I really do.
It's effectively, you can declare your own reality now. That's the point. You can invent your own reality, and it doesn't have to be moored in anything physical or natural.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a natural law. Your body is malleable. Your soul is malleable. It's interesting that people would never use the word soul in relation to this, because obviously that's a fusty old religious word or a Christian word or a bigoted word or whatever. But really, soul is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
people are saying I've got the wrong soul in my body, and that's a Gnostic claim. It's a strange claim, but it's so much of this is sort of it uses a sort of Christian terminology to present a new anthropology, and I don't think most people even really know what's happening. I feel like we're being swept up by this huge machine-like change that is turning us into machines. I mean, we're living through this notion of the so-called fourth industrial revolution, which is the age when technology merges with biology. And this is the agenda. This is what the Silicon Valley guys are up to. It's all very open now. If you can choose your gender, you can choose anything. Why shouldn't you be able to? And once you remove from the culture the notion that there is a natural law, there is a God, that you may be created, that there may be some meaning, that there may be some rules and laws, then there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't make yourself into anything you want to be.
Right.
There's no argument. Why shouldn't I? If I want to be a woman, I'll be a woman. If I upload my mind, I could do that. You don't have the right to tell me not to do that. And there's no reason I shouldn't do it.
Right.
Because it's progress. And there isn't an argument against that from a materialistic point of view, because why shouldn't people do exactly what they want to do? Right. And allow technology to take them wherever they want to go? Why not? There's no reason.
That's why it's war, though. That's why, Nietzsche was right. Eventually, those people are going to say those things, and then those people are going to have to develop a culture that supports those things, which includes some sort of force that allows them to protect themselves from people who disagree. That's coming. That's nothing new. That's coming. I see it when we travel. There's no way African culture is going to take some of this stuff on very easily. Now, they will for the money, for a little while. You're going to have to do some heavy lifting to get old world culture to say that a man can become a woman. And you're going to have to work pretty hard, pretty fast. Because they don't like it.
That's being done. That's kind of American overseas aid, isn't it? That's what the NGOs are up to. But it's true. I mean,
I know.
this is a new anthropology, and it's already welded into place in the West with, for example, hate speech laws. We've seen repeated stories of people arrested for misgendering people or saying things on social media about wearing T-shirts that have the dictionary definition of a woman on. People have been arrested for that.
Arrested?
Yeah, I think so. Don't quote me on that, but they've certainly, yeah, I think they have been actually, but they certainly have been in trouble. I mean, the Scottish government recently proposed a law, which fortunately was defeated, but the guy who proposed it is in the running to be the next first minister of Scotland, right? This is the law that says that so-called hate speech is something that isn't just prosecutable in public, but in your own home. So if you're sitting on your sofa having a conversation about something like transgenderism or whatever
like
other
this,
like this, for example, controversial topic, if you say something which can be construed as transphobic, however you'd quite define that, and your children decide to ring the police, then there we are. This is the territory that we're in. Now, in some ways, it just looks like the return of blasphemy laws to me. I mean, it's not so different from what would have happened a few hundred years ago if you'd said something negative about God or Christ or the Bible, or said something about supportive of whatever Christians decided a sin was. So in that sense, if it is a new anthropology and a new theology that's being created, then you've got new blasphemy laws as well. You've got new restrictions on speech. It sort of makes sense in a religious framework.
I love what you're saying. A new anthropology. I always think true anthropology is theanthropos, is theanthropology. And so now someone's going to go, how do you know what the truth is, man? You're just some guy in his basement. Well, I'll put it this way, like Dostoevsky said, I like that story better than all the other ones. It's more beautiful. It also allows me to work towards something like the divine. And that's a pretty good story. I like that one. I think there's other ways to, quote, prove it. But in the end, yeah, I like what you're saying. This is, again, well, we're on the same page. It's, again, why the scientific narrative. My wife was yelling at me today because I was getting into this conversation. She's a scientist in the sense she's a nurse practitioner who deals with dying people and administers, quote, chemical drugs that are built in a lab. So when she hears me say the scientific narrative, she gets irritated. She's like, are you running me down again? And what I'm really trying to say, that there's a control, there's a notion that if only you allowed me to work out everything in my very, very, very rational mind, the world would be a great place. And so now allow me the control over you, and then this thing will get done. And if you don't allow me, I'll take it. What I mean, that's not science. What I mean, though, is it's the propositional mind at play. And once it starts grinding its gears, and the people driving that narrative, when they're driving that narrative forward, if they have the resources, they'll grind you into the ground. It's the Nazis, it's the Russian imperialists, it's the Mongols. They're grinding out their worldview. I just think there's so many worldviews because of this crazy postmodern period we're in. I don't know which one grinds out the next civilization. You know what I mean?
Well, the question is whether it's sustainable. I mean, what you're describing is the French Revolution, basically. I mean, that's the first great big rational Enlightenment revolution that decides it's going to take this left brain world and it's going to create it. We're going to destroy the churches and erect the goddess of reason in the temples and this kind of stuff. They had a great little plan during the French Revolution to rationalize the French landscape and divide the whole thing up into a certain number of kilometer squares that were going to be equally distributed to population. Funnily enough, that didn't work very well.
They changed the clocks.
They changed the clocks. They changed the calendar. They worshipped the goddess of reason. That lasted about 2 months. Obviously, the Bolsheviks tried something similar. The Bolsheviks tried to abolish the family. Obviously, they abolished the church. They dynamited the cathedral in Moscow. They killed the priests and the nuns, but they still couldn't wipe out the church, actually, because you can't. Because what these things are doing is trying to rationalize human nature. And it doesn't work because we're not very fundamentally rational, and you can't do these things. But I think we're in a similar phase again. And I think that the frightening thing about this is, if it's true, is that we're going into a sort of religious war by another name. We've got the old world anthropology, and then we've got the new one that's coming along. And the new one is a sort of version of the one that arose in 1789. It's the latest attempt to sort of create equality and justice and fairness, and, you know, try arguing against those things. They sound like good things, don't they? Who wants to? Don't we want equality and justice and fairness? They sound good.
Cancelled.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, it's try being the guy who stands up and says, no, we don't want justice or fairness. We don't want that. I mean, it's not a good argument.
Well, so far you're doing it. Our little organization does it in order to bring eyes and attention and energy to our work, and I'm enjoying it, and I've got a new Substack, and you're out there. I know so many people that when they find out I'm going to talk to you, they're like, they flood me with questions, and it's wonderful, man. I've got a little half ad to do this with me right now. We've been flirting about getting you to Florida. We're having this culinary event where we take our expertise on this Georgian tradition and we bring it down to a buddy of mine's hotel that's right there in the water in Isla Morada. It's basically the Keys. And we're going to do 3 days of sort of this history and symbolism of the supra of the Georgian dinner. We're going to have the Georgian dinner on a couple nights, some live music and people singing with us. And I want you to go, but it might not work. It'll be in November. I'm almost to the dates. I just got an email today. So I'm telling everybody, Paul's considering it. I don't know you can get here, right? Because of the whole...
Well, at the moment, I'm banned from your fine country because of my unvaccinated status. I'm hoping that will change, but we'll have to see, won't we?
You're banned.
I'm a naughty man. So
you don't seem like a banned kind of person, but you're banned.
I'm a danger to American citizens, apparently. I don't know why this is. I'm afraid you are the only country left still doing this. But so maybe
why are we doing this? It's almost.
You tell me. I don't know. You're the American. You tell me. I have no idea.
Djokovic. We didn't even let Djokovic may have the most healthy heart in the entire world, and we wouldn't let him in. I don't understand. I think he's a
good deal fitter than most people. Yes, but anyway, who knows? Maybe that will change. I mean, it's a great idea. It sounds lovely. So who knows?
I hope to have you there. It's in November, and we'll get back to who's going to be able to go, but you're invited. And you invited me one time to Ireland, but I haven't been yet.
Well, you'd be welcome. You should come over. Yeah.
I'm going to hold you to it. But right now I don't see it. I get called away on junkets to places like Mozambique and Guatemala, which, by the way, I love. So
well, they sound a bit more exciting than Ireland, actually. Ireland's a bit more, it's a bit more like America. So Mozambique is probably a lot more interesting.
It's very interesting. So
yeah, I've never been there. I'd love to, actually.
Will you, well, we'll keep talking. We'll try to get you here. And then the other thing is anything coming up that you want us to know about? People love to hear what you're doing.
What am I doing? I'm doing an event in Dublin in June with Jonathan Pajot and Martin Shaw, who's a storyteller friend of mine, who's also, like me, been shocked in the last few years to find himself becoming an Orthodox Christian, having been a sort of pagan mythologist most of his life. We've been on quite a similar path. He's a good friend of mine. So that's going to be we're doing a day of events talking about wild Christianity.
Oh, yeah. Good.
What it would be like to kind of go back to the root of this faith, get back beyond the civilized patina and get back to what the Desert Fathers were up to and what that looks like if we try and talk about it now. So that's a sort of work in progress. But that should be a really interesting event, actually. So
sounds great.
That's the most interesting thing I've got coming up, I think. And there's a few other things going on as well. But
okay,
mostly just writing and talking because that's all I know how to do.
Keep doing it, please.
I don't seem to be able to stop. So not yet. Anyway, we'll see. I'll get cancelled eventually, but for now, we are still here.
Keep doing it, and then I'm going to invite you when they get rid of this shot situation to Florida. But also, I would like to see you go with me to a New York Mets baseball game. I would just like to watch your reaction to the ultimate secular experience.
Oh yeah, well, I've never been to a baseball game, so I'm game, literally.
Okay, that makes my fun. Day.
I might have to bring I'm going to have to bring my 12-year-old son to that because he would be very thrilled, I think.
Yeah. Okay, you made my day. All right, brother. Paul Kingsnorth, guys. Thank you, Paul. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Always good to talk.
Well, thank you, Paul. Check us out at www.first-things.org. This is a podcast brought to you by the creators of First Things. It's Peace Corps with an Orthodox ethos. And a lot more stuff. We thank all of our field workers. We thank you for supporting. Check us out. Come on a KP journey. Join us au revoir, nakvamdis, goodbye, and much love.